Welcome to Vienna, welcome to the Heatsink Cemetery. I'm just standing at the grave of Emanuel Colalto e San Salvatore and his wife Irma. This man represents the House of Colalto in the second half of the 19th century. He was the head of the family for a long 60 years, and he was quite an interesting person. His personal life, even though talking about it may seem as gossiping, influenced his history and the history of the house for the next 20 years. For the House of Colalto, the fourth Prince Emmanuel or Emmanuel Joseph truly represents the 19th century as same as the Austro-Hungarian Empire of the same time as represented by the Emperor Franz Joseph. But who was he, and what should we know about him? To understand his life and history, we briefly have to skim through the history of the second half of the 19th century, or so-called La fin de siècle, or Belle Époque. The 19th century is also called a long century, because politically and culturally it already begins with the French Revolution in 1789, and it finishes only with the end of the First World War in 1918. Its second half is the time of great technological advance, when railways suddenly make Europe look smaller and the prices in Baedeker guidebooks seem stable. The characteristic feature of the 19th century is the move towards modernity, reflected in secularization and emancipation of the nations. It's also the time when science and education become more accessible to broader masses. In the 19th century, the traditionally turbulent and unstable center of Europe became a part of one empire. Between 1804 and 1867 it was Austrian Empire, which 2 years after a catastrophic defeat of the Austrian army at Königgrätz split in two halves, connected only by the person of the emperor, shared army and foreign policy. That is where Austro-Hungarian Empire emerges. For Austrian aristocracy, the year 1848 brought bigger changes than the later split of the empire. That year, in the wave of revolutions which swept through Europe, they lost their patrimonial rights and became the mere farm owners. On the one hand, it changed their status. Out of sudden, their subjects had the same civic rights as them. On the other hand, it brought them a lot of money. In some cases, the loss of aristocratic privileges that had existed for centuries led to conservatism and escapism. Then, 6 years after 1848 revolution, the man we want to talk about was born. He was a son of Eduard, third Prince of Colalto, and his wife Caroline née Apponyi. The couple got married in 1834, and during the first 5 years after their wedding they had 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy called traditionally Rambaldo. But little Rambaldo died in the age of 18 months, and his older sister joined his body in the family sepulchre too. Within the family, the future heir and the salvation of the male Colalto line was considered Prince Eduard's younger brother Alphonse's son Octavian, nicknamed Salvator, born in 1842. But to the surprise of the whole family, in 1854, 20 years after the wedding and 15 years after the last childbirth, Caroline was pregnant again. On Christmas Eve 1854, she gave life to a son named Emmanuel or Emmanuel. The name is highly symbolic. It refers to prophet Isaiah, who predicted Emmanuel to be a son of a virgin and a man wise enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. The lively boy prospered well, but in his age of 8, his father Prince Eduard died on a heart attack and Uncle Alphonse became his legal guardian. The influence of his mother was strong as well, but the family branded her an unwise woman, therefore Emmanuel's upbringing was overly strict and severe. As it often happens, the strict upbringing led to the opposite of what was intended. As soon as Emmanuel came of age, he learned how to enjoy his life. He liked fine horses, started gambling in jockey club, and he liked beautiful women. In his age of 24, he fell in love with a lively Viennese girl who showed him life from a very different point of view, and whom he allegedly first saw as a model in Hans Macquart's atelier. Her name was Irma Büttner, and she was a daughter of a major who died in the Battle of Montebello on the 20th May 1859. Even though she was not without dignity, she was far from being noble, and as you already know, people in morganatic marriages were excluded from holding the Colauto Fideicommissum. Therefore, the rest of the family was strictly against Emanuel's possible marriage with a burgher. Their protest was unwise and led only to mutual estrangement between Alphonse's family line and Prince Emmanuel. But his mother, Caroline, was against too. She suffered from mental problems, her rage attacks were sometimes unbearable, and her son's indecent behavior didn't help her at all. Emmanuel therefore needed to avoid her, and the rest of family too. He and his spouse started traveling. They permanently rented a flat in Paris. Later, in the same city, they hired a villa near Bois de Boulogne. They also spent a big part of the year in Switzerland, where in Mägen, near Lucerne, they rented a villa with a breathtaking view of the Vierwaldstätter See. It comes as no surprise then that at his Moravian estates, Emmanuel was first seen only during the autumn hunting season. In Vienna, he tried to avoid the family too. At first, he rented a villa at Schönbrunnstraße, but later, when his stays in the city became more permanent, and when he even dared to bring his Irma to his Moravian estates, he had a new Palace Colauto in Vienna built. The palace, with the address Rathausstraße 21, stood just opposite the headquarters of the city corps, whose commander Emmanuel was that time. Prince Emmanuel's flat took up the whole first floor. In Moravia, he had the Kněžice chateau adapted to his needs. He preferred Kněžice to a gloomy Brtnice, where he accommodated his sister's Juliet daughter Merit Kielmanzek. Her husband, Max Kielmanzek, took care of the local affairs till 1922 when he died there. His terribly devastated grave can still be found at the wall of the local cemetery church in Brtnice. For Prince Emmanuel, Irma meant a social faux pas reflected in more regards than his family life only. He gradually resigned from all his political and social duties of his rank and lived a life of an eccentric recluse. Many charities were thankful for his generosity, but he was a stranger to his wider family and he didn't feel any need to meet them. Till her death in 1886, he visited his mother in her villa in Heiligenstadt, and after her death, he considered this Viennese outskirt a good place for his own new place of residence, which he built there in 1894. Welcome to Viennese quarter Heiligenstadt. The place where I'm standing is the former place where Villa Colauto stood, the main residence of Prince Emmanuel Colauto after 1890s. The villa was destroyed in 1945. As you can see behind me, its premises are occupied by the Vole housing estate. The neo-Baroque villa stood in a large private park and offered all the comfort of the princely class and wealth. It was also a prominent point for the tourists going up to Kahlenberg, but at the same time it offered enough privacy for a prince who liked escaping the public attention. Now, you may ask why all these details are important. Prince Emmanuel's private life was the reason why his Moravian estates were well administered, but never enlarged or improved. He had no children, and if he had had them, they would have inherited nothing, therefore he had no reason for anything more than punctual administration. His private life is also the reason why the older family line finishes with him, and then the Moravian estates pass to the younger Italian line with Prince Manfred as its head. Unlike his older brother Rambaldo, Manfred probably wasn't prepared for such a future, which turned out to be a problem. After the First World War, the Colauto estates suddenly became part of a newly established Czechoslovakia, the idealistically republican state which abolished the aristocratic titles and fideicommissum institution, and in which the Czechs and their language played an important part. While Prince Emmanuel spoke Czech and became Czechoslovakian citizen, his successors had many reasons for not doing it. But that's another story for another video. Back to Prince Emmanuel. After the war, when the old empire with all its rules didn't exist anymore, he found enough courage to finally marry Irma. Their wedding took place on the 28th of May 1919 in Heiligenstadt Church, and the guests were hosted in Emanuel's huge villa. Emanuel outlived the Austro-Hungarian Empire for 6 years. When in Czechoslovakia the massive land reform started, he didn't have enough energy to deal with all its administration. He wanted his future heir and grandnephew to take it over, while he and Irma would live on a generous appanage. But before the takeover could even begin, Emanuel started suffering from the strong digestive problems and had to be transferred to Sanatorium Löw in Vienna. He died on 11 December 1924 on duodenal ulcer. Irma was left with the Heiligenstadt villa and the right to spend summers in Uherčice Chateau, but the post-war uncertainty made her sell the villa soon. She died 7 years later and was buried to her husband's grave in Hietzing. The life and fate of the fourth Prince Colauto e San Salvatore certainly aroused compassion. He was an eccentric loner, but much of his eccentricity can be charged to the account of just one decision: his love to Irma. Unfortunately, it influenced the future fate of Moravian estates and their owners. But you must be tired now, and this is a story for another video. My name is Jan Koumar, and I'm looking forward to guiding you deeper to the history of the House of Colauto in the 20th century. See you in another video.